My name is Hillary, and I often think about how different my life might have been if my mom hadn't gotten sick. She died when I was 6 years old, and that's when everything changed. Our house, which was once full of her laughter, bright colors, and sunlight, suddenly turned into a quiet and cold place. Every wall was decorated with our photos. The three of us, Mom, Dad, and I, looked happy on them, as if nothing could overshadow our future. After she left, Dad couldn't come to his senses for a long time. For the first few months, he seemed to live on autopilot. He went to work, returned home, and hardly spoke. I tried to be quiet so as not to disturb him, but in my childhood mind, Mom's death was something temporary. I often asked when she would return from heaven, and Dad, hugging me, just repeated, "Someday." Silence and loneliness have become our constant companions. But one day everything started to change. Dad met Sandra at some work event, and soon she started coming to dinner with us. I noticed that he was smiling more, talking to her, and his eyes had regained their former sparkle. I didn't mind when, one by one, the photos of my mother began to disappear from the walls, giving way to new pictures where Sandra was already. One evening, Dad sat me down in the living room and, nervously twisting his hands, said, "Sandra and I have something to tell you." I remember twisting the hem of my dress, feeling anxious. Dad announced, "Sandra and I have decided to get married. She's going to live with us and become your new mom. You'll see, everything will be wonderful." But everything was far from wonderful. After they returned from their honeymoon, Sandra began to rebuild our house for herself. She repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and introduced her own rules. Every day I heard her stern voice, "Hillary, your room is in a mess again. The young lady must keep order." Her displeasure sounded almost every morning, "Be quiet when you play. I have a headache." Even then, as a child, I realized that I was not seen in this new house. All my attempts to complain to Dad were met only with an indifferent, "Listen to Sandra, dear. She knows what's best for you." Soon I stopped even trying. Instead, I got used to the daily chores, cleaning, washing dishes, folding your things neatly. I wanted to be a good daughter, didn't I? But one day I heard them arguing. Sandra said, "She'll be better off with your mother. She always says how she misses having a family around." Dad's voice was quiet but firm, "I promised Sarah. I swore that I would take care of Hillary." At that moment, I felt relieved, not even fully understanding what kind of money he had mentioned. Money for my college, which my mother had left for me. Soon everything changed even more. Sandra got pregnant, and Dad was over the moon. "I'm finally having my baby," she said proudly. Those words cut harder than all her reproaches. They emphasized what I always knew: I was a stranger to her, not her own. When Emma was born, I was 8. I remember standing with Dad in the hospital hallway. Through the glass, we saw my newborn sister wrapped in a pink blanket. Dad didn't stop smiling. "You're the big sister now, Hillary," he said, stroking my head. "You're going to help take care of Emma, aren't you?" I nodded, not understanding the weight on my shoulders. Everything became clear when we brought Emma home. Sandra seemed blinded by maternal joy, but there was no place for me in her attention. All her love and care went to a new family member, and I became just a shadow in my own house. Sandra wasted no time turning me into her personal assistant. "Hillary, bring me some fresh diapers. Hillary, wash these bottles. Hillary, hold Emma while I make a phone call." The demands sounded one after another, as if I didn't have my own life, my own desires. By the age of 9, I could change diapers, cook baby food, and even cope with a crying baby, while my peers played outside, collected bugs, and built huts. I was whipping bananas into mashed potatoes and stirring rice flakes for Emma. I remember the day when I first dared to ask for some freedom. "But I want to go to Sarah's birthday party," I begged, hoping for understanding. But Sandra coldly snapped, "Emma is needed here. She's teething and acting up. And who's going to clean up after her in the playroom? You?" These words robbed me of my last hopes. My childhood was inexorably melting away, like melting ice on a warm summer night. As Emma grew older, so did my responsibilities. I had to be there to make sure that she didn't fall down while learning to walk, so that she didn't put anything in her mouth that could harm her. But most of all, I felt bitterness from the way Sandra and Dad showered her with attention and gifts. Each of her tantrums ended with a new toy or treat, as if this was the only way to win her love. When Emma turned 4, she realized that she could manipulate adults. One day she spilled juice on her new dress, and then, bursting into tears, ran to Sandra. "Hillary pushed me." I spent the whole weekend locked in my room. Another time, Emma broke an expensive musical toy and accused me. "Hillary was playing with it, and it broke." I was deprived of pocket money to pay for a replacement, although I was absorbed in my homework at that moment. But the most painful thing was how Sandra believed Emma's lie about the split dress. Emma hid the scissors in my backpack, and when Sandra found them, her anger was indomitable. "How could you be so jealous?" she shouted, waving pieces of cloth in front of me. "Do you know how much this dress costs?" I tried to explain, but Dad interrupted us. "Hillary, go to your room. We will discuss your punishment later." As I walked past, I saw Emma grinning in the doorway. She already knew then that she could get away with anything, and I would be to blame for everything. The only salvation for me was Grandma Rose's house. Every weekend I spent with her was like an escape to another world. There I could laugh as loud as I wanted and be just a kid. Her cozy house was filled with the aroma of freshly baked cookies and the sounds of old jazz records. "Look at you, skin and bones," she was indignant, pouring me a mountain of pancakes. "This woman makes you run like Cinderella." Grandma has always stood by my side. She was the only one who saw me struggling to find my place in the world that Sandra had turned into a prison. Even Emma, arriving at her grandmother's house, quickly realized that her tricks did not work here. "I want ice cream before dinner." Emma stomped her feet. "Young lady, we have dinner in this house first," Grandma replied firmly. "And there will be no reward for tantrums." Emma never came back after that. "Grandma's is boring," she told her parents. But it was good for me at my grandmother's. It was a house where the same rules applied to everyone. Where I felt important, needed, and loved. However, nothing could last forever. The day came that changed everything. Emma had a particularly dramatic attack about doing her homework, and Grandma was visiting our house that day. Her stern voice cut through the evening silence. "John, the child is terribly spoiled, Sandra. You're raising a little tyrant. You need to handle this better." The words cut like a knife. Sandra's face turned red. She flared up with anger. "How dare you criticize my upbringing? You have no right." But Grandma wasn't going to back down. She lifted her chin and answered, "I have every right when I see that my granddaughters are treated so differently. Look what you're doing to Hillary." It seemed that Grandma's words were a bolt of lightning, and they hit exactly on target. Sandra burst into tears and screamed that she would not tolerate such disrespect. The evening ended with screams and a slamming door. Dad, as usual, took Sandra's side. The next day, she announced that we would no longer visit Grandma Rose. "But it's not fair," I exclaimed, fighting back tears. "Life is unfair," she snapped. "And if I catch you trying to contact her, you'll be under arrest until you get into college." College. This word has become a lifeline for me. It was my beacon in the long, hard, and humiliating days. I immersed myself in my studies, counting down the days until graduation. I knew that my mother had left money for my education. I've heard Dad talk about it over and over again. This money was my ticket to freedom, my only chance to escape. But graduation came, and the world seemed to collapse on me. I was still wearing my hat and robes when Dad and Sandra sat me down for a serious conversation. Dad began, avoiding looking me in the eye. "We decided to save this money for Emma's education. She has such bright prospects." Sandra added with deliberate gentleness, "And you, Hillary, are more suitable for practical work." Something inside me has broken. For the first time in my life, I screamed, "This is my money. Mom left them for me. You promised, Dad. You're just a liar." Dad, blushing, shouted back, "You ungrateful girl. After all we've done for you. Leave tomorrow. You can start your adult life somewhere else." But I wasn't looking forward to tomorrow. Tears blurred my eyes as I threw clothes and the most necessary things into my backpack. I grabbed a hidden photo of my mom, kissed her, and swore that I would find my way. Jenny, my friend, always said that I could stay with her family if things got bad. Now things have gotten so bad that it couldn't get any worse. Working as a waitress at Silver Spoon, a busy downtown restaurant, wasn't a dream, but it did pay the bills. Every night I came home with aching legs and the smell of French fries ingrained in my clothes. But it was my life, and it belonged only to me. Jenny's parents welcomed me with open arms and allowed me to stay for the first few months. I was grateful, but I knew I couldn't abuse their kindness. That's when I met Maria, another waitress from the restaurant. She was looking for a roommate. "The apartment is tiny and the neighbors are noisy," she warned. But it was a cheap place, and I agreed. She wasn't exaggerating. Our accommodation could barely accommodate 2 beds and a sofa, but this was our territory, where no one could dictate their roles to us. We shared the bills, cooked together, and worked the same shifts. "What are your plans for school?" Maria asked one day while we were counting tips for the evening. I just shook my head at Maria's question about my study plans. Rent, utilities, food, all this barely allowed me to make ends meet. College seemed like a distant dream, buried the night I left home. But then, on a typical Tuesday, in the middle of my workday, my phone rang. I almost dropped the coffee pot when I saw the familiar number. "Hillary, dear," Grandma's voice came on the line. "I've been trying to track you down. How are things at college?" My breath caught in my throat. My throat was so tight that the words were barely coming out. I'm not in college, Grandma." There was a pause on the line. "What do you mean?" she finally asked, and her voice became anxious. "Your father saved Sarah's money. Didn't he tell you?" I couldn't stand it and told her everything, about how I was kicked out of the house, how I work as a waitress trying to survive, and how I cry every night in the restroom of the restaurant, feeling like nobody. Grandma was silent for so long that I already thought that the connection was broken. But then her voice cut through with unexpected firmness. "These pathetic egoists. Listen to me, Hillary. I'll pay for your college. No arguments." I tried to object, but Grandma didn't give me a chance. "Won't you let me do this?" "Well, let it be. I'll do it anyway. Your mother was like a daughter to me, and I won't let them steal your future." There was such determination in her words that tears rolled down my cheeks. "Thank you, Grandma," I whispered, feeling like a child who was finding hope for the first time in a long time. That's how my new stage of life began. Grandma found a local university for me with evening classes. "Great," she said. "You will start studying next semester. But, Hillary, let's keep this between us. I don't want to have anything to do with your father or that woman. My days have become long and exhausting. I got up at 5 in the morning, studied, went to classes, and then went to the restaurant for a shift. I returned home late at night, exhausted, with aching legs, smelling of French fries and fried onions. But instead of resting, I opened my textbooks. Maria looked at me like I was crazy. "When do you sleep at all?" I joked that I would sleep it off in a week, but I really couldn't afford to slow down. With every test I passed, with every job I passed, I felt small victories. They were not only for me, but also for Mom. These victories reminded me that, despite everything, I was following her precept. Yes, I didn't manage to use her money, but I was moving towards my goal, towards the education she dreamed of for me. The best part was that my family didn't know about it. They probably imagined that I was still waiting tables and not getting anywhere. So be it. Let them think I've given up. I realized a long time ago that I don't have to prove anything to people who don't care. I was preparing for my final business management exam when a message from Emma appeared on Facebook. In the photo, she was grinning, standing next to a brand new red Mercedes in designer clothes. "Look what Mom and Dad gave me for my birthday," the caption read. "This car probably cost more than I've earned in the last 2 years." The second photo was even worse. She posed with a college acceptance letter. "I joined the staff. Mom and Dad pay for everything: tuition, housing, meal plan. They even promised a trip to Europe for spring break. But hey, Hillary, at least you get free fries on shifts, right?" I looked at the screen, then at my textbook. Anger and resentment flared up in me, but instead of letting them capture me, I just clicked the block user button. In 3 weeks, I was going to prove that I was stronger than them. I got my business degree, and only my grandmother was at the ceremony. She watched me walk across the stage and applauded the loudest. That was all I needed. After the ceremony, we went to dinner, modest and cozy, at a small family restaurant that she loved. But after a warm evening, work was waiting for me, and I again plunged into the familiar rhythm of shifts, orders, and kitchen noise. Life began to change when Mr. Peterson, the owner of the restaurant, called me to his office one morning. "Hillary," he said, "we've noticed how hard you work. How would you feel about becoming a shift supervisor? You know this place inside and out, the staff respects you, and now you have the appropriate education." It was the beginning of a new chapter. 6 months later, I was promoted to floor administrator, and my salary doubled. I was able to afford to move out of the tiny apartment I shared with Maria. As the years passed, I continued to grow. By the time I was 30, I was running the entire restaurant. Silver Spoon turned from an ordinary cafe into one of the best establishments in the city, where every table was scheduled for weeks in advance. My name was in the restaurant industry magazines, but my family still thought I was just a waitress. I lived in a spacious apartment in a high-rise building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city. In the morning, I stood with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise, and thought about how far I had come from that scared girl who ran away from home with only a backpack. One Monday, I received a Facebook message from Mrs. Roberts, our former neighbor. She was one of the few kind people from my past. When Sander got particularly harsh, Mrs. Roberts always found a way to cheer me up. She brought me cookies or just told me that I was a good girl. She even helped me hide my mom's photos when Sander decided to throw them away. "Hillary dear," she wrote, "I think you should know that Emma is graduating next week." She booked a table at Silver Spoon and bragged to everyone about how she was going to make you wait for their table. She thinks it will be fun to see her college dropout sister catering the prom. She invited all her friends and even some of our old neighbors. I thought you should know about it. I leaned back in my leather office chair, looking through the one-way glass at the busy restaurant room. My staff, as if in a coordinated dance, moved between the tables, serving customers. A slow smile touched my lips. I opened the reservation system and quickly found her reservation, Emma Wilson's party, Saturday, 7 p.m., with a note asking for the best table in the house. The price is not specified. My fingers froze over the keyboard. With one click, I could cancel her reservation, depriving her of the opportunity to stage the performance she had so clearly planned. But I stopped. Canceling would be too easy. No, if Emma wants a show, I'll give her a show. Just not the one she expects. She accepted everything that was happening with such calm pleasure, as if it were her own personal performance. She held the menu gracefully, like an actress playing her part in a perfectly staged play, but her eyes, sparkling with a cheerful twinkle, followed every movement of Emma and her companions. I walked slowly out of my office, bearing myself with the dignity and confidence that my path from waitress to manager of one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city had given me. Emma's party had already settled down at their best table, and I couldn't help but notice how she was deliberately laughing a little louder than she should, obviously tried to get attention. Her friends supported her in this farce, nodding and making compliments that sounded insincere even from a distance. I approached their table with a welcoming smile that could outshine even the most dazzling chandelier in the hall. "Good evening," I said with a slight tilt of my head. "Welcome to Silver Spoon. I'm Hillary Wilson, the manager of this restaurant. I'll personally take care of your dinner tonight." For a moment, something resembling confusion appeared on Emma's face, as if her carefully thought-out plan had just begun to crumble. But she quickly pulled herself together. "Oh, Hillary," she drawled, as if she had seen an old friend. "How nice that you decided to serve us personally. I'm sure it will be unforgettable." Her tone was so venomously sweet that I could barely contain a smile. "Oh, absolutely," I replied, handing the menus printed on expensive gold, embossed paper. "We have a special evening tonight." I noticed how Grandma, sitting at her hidden table, was barely holding back her laughter, covering her mouth with a napkin. "So," I continued, maintaining my professionalism, "may I offer you our tasting set? This is an exclusive offer from our chef, who uses only the best ingredients." I deftly avoided her sarcastic attacks, sliding through the conversation like an experienced swordsman. Miguel, our chef, and the team were already ready to show themselves in all their glory. Serving the first appetizers, tiny caviar tartlets decorated with greenery elicited admiring glances, which Emma tried to hide behind her mask of arrogance. "It's amazing," one of her friends said, looking at the plate. "This is clearly not the restaurant I imagined." Emma mumbled something, but I wasn't listening. Instead, I turned to my grandmother, pretending to clarify the details of her order, but really just enjoying her approving look. "The chocolate souffle is already in the works," I whispered to her, and she replied with a gentle nod. The highlight of the evening was the moment when I brought the bill. It was packed in an exquisite leather case, and I carefully put my business card in the upper corner. "Thank you for your visit," I said, looking directly into Emma's eyes. "I hope you enjoyed everything." She opened the case, and I noticed her face slowly changing. Her friends froze, apparently not used to seeing Emma lose her temper. "Are you the manager?" she finally managed, her voice trembling a little, and for the first time that evening, her smile seemed genuinely confused to me. "How is this even?" "Oh, I've been working hard," I replied calmly, letting every word settle in the air. "And as you can see, it all paid off." Grandma, who was sitting at her table, grunted approvingly, as if she were watching the final chord of a symphony. Emma froze, her face like a mask, from which the complacency instantly disappeared. "What?" she gasped, her voice breaking. It seemed that her world, in which she was the center of attention, began to crack at the seams. I stood calmly, in my suit, motionless as a statue. My smile remained unchanged, but inside I felt a surge of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in many years. I turned to my grandmother, who, without hiding her pleasure, carefully put a napkin on the table and stood up. "You heard me, Emma," she said in her confident voice. "Hillary is not just a manager. She is a co-owner of this institution. All these years you've been pretending to be successful, but your sister has done more than you can imagine. She worked like you've never worked and probably won't." There was a tense silence in the hall. Emma looked as if her grandmother's words had hit her right in the face. Her friends, who a moment ago had been laughing at her sarcastic remarks, now avoided her gaze, averting their eyes to their plates or exchanging glances with each other. Dad, who was sitting opposite, tried to say something, but he didn't have enough words. Sandra, who had been playing the role of the stage queen all her life, was now sitting so quietly that her presence was barely felt. She held on to her glass of wine as if it were the last support. I stepped forward, holding a tablet with a menu in my hands, as if it were a symbol of my success. "Let me clarify the situation," I began, deliberately keeping my tone calm and professional. "When I left home, I had to learn everything from scratch. Working as a waitress, I went to college, and then began to grow in my career. After years of hard work and determination, Mr. Peterson, the owner of Silver Spoon, offered me a stake in the business. Now I manage not only this restaurant, but also participate in the expansion of our network. So, Emma, you're right about one thing: my life has really changed." Emma was still sitting with her mouth open, as if she couldn't believe her ears. You made it all up, she hissed, but her voice sounded weak, as if she was trying to convince herself, not me. Grandma, who always knew how to prick at the right moment, leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. Emma, dear, she said with a sweet smile that always made you wonder what would follow. Maybe instead of wasting time trying to humiliate Hillary, you can try to learn something from your sister. For example, dignity. Dad, pale, cleared his throat. Hillary, he began, his voice sounding uncertain. Why didn't you tell us? I turned to him, meeting his gaze for the first time all evening. Because you never asked, Dad, I replied with a touch of bitterness. I was just a shadow to you, something that's easy to ignore while you were playing happy family. But now, apparently, you want to know what I've been doing all these years. Let me tell you, I've been building a life where I don't need your approval. Sandra, who had been silent all this time, finally said, This is all just ridiculous. Are you saying that you're more successful than Emma? Her voice trembled with barely contained anger. Sandra, I don't want to say anything, I replied, looking her straight in the eye. I'm showing you. And with that, I raised my hand, signaling the staff to serve the best champagne. My staff moved as per the script, bringing bottles of champagne and snacks on silver trays. I looked at my grandmother, who was smiling like a cat that had eaten a canary. For all the guests, at my expense, I announced, which caused a slight murmur of approval in the hall. Emma, I said to my sister. Welcome to my restaurant. I hope your evening will be truly unforgettable. Grandma rose from her secluded table, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor, and every movement radiated greatness and firmness. The look she threw at Dad could freeze the hottest hell. She paused next to their table, folded her hands in front of her, and said in a voice that brooked no objections. While you were busy spoiling one daughter and crushing the other, I took matters into my own hands. I sent Hillary to college. She worked here as a waitress during the day and studied business management at night. Every success she has achieved is the result of her work. She didn't ask anyone for anything. Unlike some people. Emma jumped up from the table, her face flushed. It's not fair. You're lying. She didn't do anything. She exclaimed, her voice ringing with indignation. Grandma turned to her, her face as cold as marble. Nothing, except to become a successful businesswoman, co-owner of one of the most prestigious restaurants in the city. And you? Your achievements are to live on Dad's money and put your expensive toys on the internet. Is that what you wanted to say? Sandra twitched, as if ready to answer, but Dad finally spoke, although his voice was uncertain. Mom, I didn't know that you. John Wilson, Grandma interrupted him icily. You let this woman turn you against your own daughter. You gave the money her mother left especially for Hillary to Emma's college. Well, guess what? I've already changed my will. Everything I own, including my share in this restaurant, now belongs to Hillary. Sandra gasped, jumping up from her seat. You can't do that. She screamed, her voice filled with rage. Oh, I can, Grandma retorted. And I did. Emma has lived her whole life as if everyone owes her something. She could use a little humility and basic decency. Emma lost the last remnants of her composure. She grabbed her glass of wine and threw it across the table, scattering plates and food. The guests in the restaurant gasped and whispered. It's not fair. Emma screamed, looking at me. You're all jealous of me. I calmly raised my hand, signaling the guards. In the blink of an eye, 2 men in black suits approached the table. Please get these people out, I said quietly but firmly. Sandra jumped up, her face turning purple. You can't kick us out. Stop it, she screamed. Do you know who we are? Of course I do, I replied, not raising my voice. You are intruders who spoil the evening for other guests of my restaurant. Leave now, or I'll call the police and charge you with property damage. Emma reached for another plate, but one of the guards grabbed her arm. Dad stood silently, his face expressing confusion. While they were all being escorted out of the restaurant, he turned to me. "Hillary, please, can we talk?" I turned my back and walked away, leaving his words unanswered. 5 years have passed. Silver Spoon became the best restaurant in the city. I opened 2 more establishments, and they also flourished. Grandma stayed true to her word. Her will now really meant that I would become the sole heir to her estate. But fortunately, she was still strong and full of energy. Every Sunday she came to the restaurant for her favorite chocolate souffle. I got a text from Emma last week. She wrote about how she had changed and wanted to make amends. I didn't even read it. I did what I always do with messages from this part of my life. I clicked delete and went back to work. Some chapters are better left closed.